Gentlemen, welcome back to the next part of the virtual Freeform Festival Christmas edition. And we've already had an amazing cookery demonstration to start our morning off at 11 o'clock. Now, I'm very thrilled to say we are going to experience something very exciting and very delicious because we are going to find out how to make gluten-free and vegan cinnamon buns. With a discussion about gluten-free flour, what it is and how to bake with it successfully. And all of this is going to be presented to us by the one and only Vicki Montague. So please sit back, relax. If you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and I will ask Vicki as we go along. But Vicki, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's delightful to be here again, although a little strange because I think it was this time last year that I was in Bristol doing this and there were people to look at. This is very peculiar because I can't see anybody. So anyway, you're in my kitchen today and it is a beautiful sunny day here in Devon. I hope it's lovely and sunny where you are too. We are going to make cinnamon rolls, as Tony said. So I have made some earlier because we are not going to be able to make the whole roll today, so I'm going to literally show you how to make it. We're going to prove it, and we may have time for you to see that when it's come out of the oven and it's risen. But you obviously won't get time to see them actually bake because they take 30 minutes. So I baked these ones earlier, and hopefully you can see they are the most delicious, yummy buns. You can unravel them like a proper cinnamon roll. And when they're warm, they are proper squidgy and delicious. So that's what the end result is going to look like. And I'm going to basically take you through all the steps to get you there. If you do want the recipe, it's on my website, which is freeformfairy.com. And it's called cinnamon roll or cinnamon bun, I'm not sure which. So you'll find it there. And I think that's all I need to say. Let's just get cracking. So I have weighed out some of my gluten-free flour. So I will talk a little bit more about gluten-free flour once we've got this kind of going. But I developed my own gluten-free flour blend, which is a whole grain flour blend. It's very different from any others on the market, and I'll explain a little bit more about why a little later on. But let's just crack on right now. So I've put 500 grams of that into a large bowl. And into that, I'm going to add 20 grams of sugar. I usually use coconut sugar to make this refined sugar-free. I haven't got any, so I'm using a soft brown sugar today. And that just adds a nice flavour to it. So the coconut sugar adds like a really lovely sort of caramelly flavour, I guess. If you haven't got coconut sugar or brown sugar, you could use just bog standard white sugar, it would be fine. I'm going to add half a teaspoon of salt. Put that in with the dry ingredients. I've got 10 grams of psyllium husk powder. Now, psyllium husk powder is the powdered form of psyllium husk. And psyllium husk is the sort of outer section of the psyllium seed, which is just a lovely high fibre seed. And it does a brilliant job of replacing gluten in gluten-free baking. So that's why I'm using it. You could use xanthan gum. I tend not to use xanthan gum now because I've found over the years that many people have difficulty with xanthan gum and it can cause the same sort of problems in their tummies as when they were eating gluten. So I try to avoid it. It can upset people's tummies, and if you do have ongoing issues with digestive issues, then I would very carefully look at how much xanthan gum you're eating, because you may be having it in almost everything that you buy from the shops that's gluten-free. It's in almost every product. So just have a look at that if you do continue to have symptoms. And I'm going to add 10 grams of Easy Bake yeast, which is a fast-acting yeast, and it doesn't need activating beforehand. So we're putting that in with the dry ingredients, and I use a brand called Allinson, and it's called their Easy Bake yeast. And it's just the easiest yeast to use because you don't need to faff around doing anything with it. You just put it with the dry ingredients and mix it in. So all of the dry ingredients are in. You're going to give that a good stir. Now, the last dry ingredient to put in is your spice. So I like to use cardamom in this. All I can hear is my dog outside my kitchen door clicking her nails on the floor and banging on the door to come in. She wants to come see you, but I'm going to completely ignore her, and hopefully she'll go away. Hopefully you can't hear it. The joys of being at home doing baking. So spice. I'm using cardamom because that's what traditional Swedish buns, like the ones you get in IKEA, not naming any names, that's what they would use as the spice. Now, if you don't have cardamom, you can use mixed spice, but like I say, I prefer the flavour of the cardamom. It is a bit of a faff because you tend to only be able to find it in pods. So what I've done is I've just bashed those pods in my pestle and mortar to release the seeds that are inside. I've picked all the seeds out, thrown away the outer husk, and then given it a good bash to make it into a powder. You may be able to get cardamom powder. I haven't seen it, but if you can, that would be an easier way of doing it, but I guess probably less fresh and less zingy. This is absolutely beautiful when you first crush it. The smell is amazing. So those are your options. You can use mixed spice if you don't have cardamom, but I highly recommend using a cardamom because it makes such a difference. And just to say that I used 10 cardamom pods for that one. So, no I didn't, I used 20 actually, 20. Crushed them up and pop them in. And if you didn't have that, it would be 1 or 2 teaspoons of mixed spice. So into that, I am going to add some warmed dairy-free milk, and that was 225 grams that I measured out earlier on. And I just warmed that in the microwave for 40 seconds. If you don't have a microwave or you don't like using them, that's fine. You can just put your milk onto the hob and just get it so it's tepid. You don't want it hot because that will kill the yeast, so you just want it to be warm. And I'm going to add 200 grams of dairy-free yogurt. Now, of course, if you're not dairy-free, you can use ordinary cow's milk yogurt and cow's milk. This yogurt that I'm using is the brand Coco, K-O-K-O, and it's quite a liquid coconut yogurt. If you're using other brands, you might find they're quite thick, in which case you may need to water them down a little bit to get them into a sort of spoonable, a standard kind of yogurt texture that you have when you're using ordinary cow's milk, plain yogurt. If it's really thick, you will end up needing a lot more extra liquid. So just bear that in mind. If you're using one that's fairly runny, like mine, you'll need the 200 grams. So I'm going to give that an initial stir. If you have a stand mixer, you can do this in a stand mixer and it's a lot quicker and easier, but I wanted to show you how to make it without any special equipment, because I know, some people don't have that. So, and indeed I didn't have a stand mixer until about 2-3 years ago. So I've given it an initial stir, and I'm just going to get my hands in now and just bring the mixture together, and I will show you in a sec, but it's a little bit difficult to show you at this stage. So I'm just combining the dry ingredients into the wet. So really just giving it a good squidge. It's my technical term that I like to use. If you're interested in learning how to make lots of delicious, gluten-free, healthier bakes, then I've got a couple of online cookery courses that I launched a couple of months ago. So the first one is called Gluten-Free Savoury Bakes, and that one includes this lesson, so the lesson on how to make cinnamon rolls. I think actually it might be the other one, you'll have to look. Anyway, one of them includes this recipe and how to make it, and the other one is called Healthy Gluten-Free Treats, and both of them are available to buy on my website, which, as I said earlier, is freefromfairy.com. If you look under online courses, you'll find all the details there. So I'm just going to knead this, and hopefully you can see. I'm finding it very difficult to see what you can see because A, the screen is quite a long way away, and B, it's about 3 centimetres by 2. I'm very small on the screen, so it's hard to see what you can see. Hopefully you can see this. So I'm just going to literally give it a knead, and if you're new to gluten-free baking, and you've tried a few bakes out, you'll be wondering how on earth I'm managing to do this, because when you bake gluten-free, ordinarily, you're ending up, if you make bread or anything like that, it's often a sort of runny liquid. It's like a batter. And this is the joy of my gluten-free flour blend, is that it enables you to actually bake as if you were baking something with gluten. It's very high in protein, it's high in fibre because it's whole grain, so it's made up with 70% whole grain flours, and I've used something called teff, something called sorghum, and something which you've probably heard of, which is buckwheat. And they're wonderful whole grain flours, as I say, full of fibre, high in resistant starch, which means that it's great for your gut bacteria, but also great to keep you fuller for longer. So if you find that you're eating gluten-free food and you're hungry a lot, well, that's because the flours that your products are made from are white refined starches more often than not, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And so your body effectively uses them up like sugar. It absorbs them and it's converted into sugar very quickly, and it's left your system, so it leaves you feeling hungry. With whole grains, because they're high in fibre and protein, it takes your body a longer time to break them down, and it means that you're kept fuller for longer. So another bonus of using this flour blend. So what I'm doing now is I've just popped it onto a piece of, this is like a silicone liner, and I got that in Lakeland, and there's a link on my website. There's a section called Vicki Recommends, and you'll find all the things that I recommend in there, and this is one of them. I use it a lot in gluten-free bread making. It makes it really, really straightforward. You can line trays with it so that things don't stick, but for this kind of thing, it's really brilliant for helping you to roll the product. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my rolling pin to roll that out, and it also means you can turn it. I don't know if you can see that, but I can literally turn the whole thing around so that I don't have to work in funny angles when I'm rolling things out like pastry. So I'm going to pop it around that way, and I'm going to roll it out into a square. No, I'm not. I'm going to roll it into a rectangle that is around about 27 centimetres by 25. And you don't have to be dead accurate. You don't need to get your ruler out, but you know, roughly that size. And what I'm doing is just tapping the edges in and trying to bring it into a rectangle. So you don't actually need to use a rolling pin here. You could easily get away with doing this without a rolling pin, because you can just push the dough out, as hopefully you can see. So I'm going to just roll it one more bit, and then I'll shape it with my fingers. It's much easier to do that. And we are nearly done with this, which is, you can see how quick and easy it is to make. So I'm just going to push the edges out to make it into a relatively even rectangle, and then I'll lift it up and hopefully you'll be able to see it. So I confess I have had one of these for my breakfast this morning. They make the perfect special breakfast, I guess. So this is a breakfast that we like to have on Christmas Day. And these ones, or these ones, I will pop in the freezer. And then on Christmas Day, all I'll do is take them out of the freezer and pop them into the microwave, or you could just scatter them with a little bit of water and pop them in the oven just to heat them through. And they're best served warm. And if you're not going to eat them on the day, then I always recommend freezing gluten-free bread products, because it just means that they are then fresher to eat. So there's my rectangle. And at this point, you could basically put whatever you liked on it. So if you don't like cinnamon and sugar, I mean, who doesn't like cinnamon and sugar? But if you don't, you could put anything you like on here. You could put chocolate spread on. You could put, I was thinking this morning how lovely it would be with marmalade, orange marmalade and some dark chocolate chips. Might have to do that one. If you take the spices out and the sugar out, you can make this into pizza rolls. So you just, at this point, you would cover it with tomato puree, maybe some garlic powder, and some mixed herbs, a little bit of dairy-free cheese, roll it up, and you've got some lovely lovely rolls to go in your lunch boxes and things like that. So you can make it savoury if you omit the sugar and spice. Now what I've got here is my cinnamon sugary mix. So I've put 50 grams of softened coconut butter. Now you don't want to make it liquid, you just want it to be soft. With 50 grams of ideally coconut sugar. Again, like I say, I've used soft light brown sugar. And then I'm going to add, now my dog's barking, I'm going to add a tablespoon of cinnamon into that. And no, I'm not measuring it. Oh, and the doorbell. You just love it. It's just perfect. I hear from Naomi Devlin, who was on yesterday, that her husband crawled into the background of her demo, trying to get across the kitchen, and thought he was out of shot, but actually he was clearly in shot, crawling across the floor, which is interesting. At least we haven't had that. We've just had dog barking, doorbell ringing, you know, all that kind of jazz. All the fun of doing Zoom calls from home, which we're all very used to now. So I've given that a good mix, and you can see it's like a paste rather than a liquid. You really don't want it to be liquid because it will roll out when you try and roll these up. So I'm going to spread that across the dough, and you want it to be a nice even layer, but you don't want to go all the way over it. So you want to leave about an inch at the furthest end. So I'm going to spread that all over, but I'm going to leave the inch at the end furthest away from me. And that just means that when I roll it up, it hopefully won't all get lost by being squidged out. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Now, I don't suppose you can really see what I'm doing, but spreading it thinly or evenly across the whole of the dough. And then we'll give it a roll. And as I say, this silicone paper really helps with the rolling, but if you don't have it, you can just use baking paper or something like that, or even foil probably would help to just roll it through. So, now I've got mucky hands, let's give them a wipe. Now I'm going to use the nearest edge to me. I really hope you can see this. And I'm going to just gently fold it over. So I'm going to give it a little fold. We want to make that one quite tight because you don't want loose cinnamon buns. And then I'm going to lift it using the silicone and just gently ease it off, and it will just roll itself effectively. I'm just going to ease it off, and it is going to roll itself into a lovely cylinder. So there we go. And now I'm going to roll it off with parchment, and I'm going to pop it back on. So hopefully you can see we've got a nice cylindrical roll, and I finished it on the seam, as it were, so on the cut edge. Get rid of my sticky fingers. And now the next thing you're going to need is, now what size is this? I think it's 20 centimetres by 20, but I could be wrong. But a really good non-stick square tray. And put that out of the way. I'm going to cut this into 9. So that was why I said 27, roughly 27 centimetres, because that makes a nice even 3 centimetre per bun. So I'm estimating it. They will probably be completely different sizes, but I don't really mind. If you like perfection, then I would get your ruler out and make it exact. So what I'm doing, I'll just show you, is popping them into my tin, and you can see I'm doing 3 by 3 by 3, and there's a good gap between them, which hopefully you'll see. And at this stage, I'm just going to pop my oven on to its lowest setting, which on mine is before there's even any numbers. So there's no numbers yet. I've put it on to effectively, it should be about 50 degrees. So the first number I've got marked on my cooker is 100. So I've just turned it to just coming on. I can hear it come on, but it's not on an actual number. And I'm going to pop them in, and then literally, you can see I've got, oh, hello. We've got a good space between them all. I'm going to give them a little brush with some melted coconut oil. And that's just to keep them from drying out while they rise, and also to keep them nice and moist as they cook. So just going to brush that over the top. Again, if you were not avoiding dairy, you can make these with butter. So you just use softened butter instead of the softened coconut oil with the sugar, and then brush some melted butter over the top. And if you can get it down the sides, even better, because it gives them a nice sort of browned side. And I'm going to pop that in the oven, in that warm oven, for 20 minutes. So I'm going to stick my timer on. And depending on how long I rattle on about gluten-free flour, I'm just going to wash my hands, and how many questions you might want to ask. You might get to see them once they're risen. Basically, after 20 minutes, when you take them out of the oven, they will all be touching each other. There won't be any gaps anymore. You take them out, you turn the oven then on to 160 fan, which is 180 for an ordinary oven, and I think that's gas mark 4. And once it comes to temperature, you bake them for 30 minutes, or thereabouts. So they should come out looking like this. And that is basically how simple it is to make delicious cinnamon buns. I don't know whether there's any questions now, or whether I will just talk a little bit about flour and why it's important to understand about gluten-free flour before you start baking or wasting loads of ingredients on bakes that don't work. So I'll just wait a second and see if there's any questions.
So Vicki, before you move on to the flour bit, not so much questions, but a little bit of incoming information for you. I think it's Venetia says you can get cardamom powder at Morrison's.
Ah, there you go.
Hannah says, yes, cardamom in cinnamon buns. She's going, yes, cardamom in cinnamon buns. She says maybe some Polish shops might have ground cardamom as well as Scandi shops. Yes. But if we know that you can definitely get it in Morrison's, that's good. Mm-hmm. And Hannah also says, and that's what I love about living in the UK. Cinnamon buns are okay for breakfast.
Oh, yes. Anything like that's good for breakfast, that's what I say. I mean, after all, there's less sugar in that, I would argue, than a bowl of something like Cocoa Pops or something revolting like that. Not revolting. Very tasty, but, full of sugar. Any sweetened cereal is actually very high in sugar. These have got, about 8 grams of sugar in, I guess. So I think you can get away with that. That's what I say, especially at Christmas. I mean, why
not? Two other questions. Eve says, is it possible to find this recipe at a later date? It sounds and looks delicious. Yes.
So it's on my website, freefromfairy.com. And it's called cinnamon bun or a cinnamon roll. I'm not sure which I called it, but you'll find it there's a search bar at the top of my website. You'll find it there. And I will post a link to it on social media, my social media channels. So I'm at freefromfairy across social media. So I will pop a link onto it from there.
Fantastic. And also Ali Wilson has a question. Ali says, can you prove them in the fridge overnight to cook in the morning?
I never have, but I don't see why not. The only issue with that is that you need to bring them up to temperature, up to sort of room temperature before you bake them, which can often take quite a long time, which is why I say make them, let them cool and put them straight in the freezer, and then heat them through when you actually want to eat them. It's a better way of doing it.
Okay, I think that's all the questions and inputs so far, yes.
Okay. So I'll just talk a little bit about flour, because I think it's one of the things that it's really critical to gluten-free baking, and people just don't really understand what it is. So there is no such thing as gluten-free flour. So obviously, when you're used to baking with wheat flour, if a recipe says flour, it will say plain flour or self-raising flour or bread flour or whatever, and it's wheat flour. That's it. That's all it can be. Gluten-free flour is a lot more complicated. So when a recipe says gluten-free flour, what they've actually used is a blend of different gluten-free flours. And that's because there are there are at least 15, if not 20, if not more, gluten-free flours. So there is no such thing as a gluten-free flour. And this is where the confusion comes in. So there's a whole array of delicious gluten-free flours. And Naomi Devlin, who was here yesterday, is an absolute expert on different gluten-free flours and baking amazing bakes using all of the different flours. Now, me being me and hating faffing around when I'm cooking, got really fed up when I was baking with having to have a cupboard full of 10 different gluten-free flours in order to make something that tasted really good. So that was basically why I started experimenting with all of those different flours to come up with one blend of flours that would work in all of my baking. So I didn't have to have 20 different gluten-free flours. So hence my gluten-free flour blend was born after a couple of years of experimenting and finding a blend that worked in everything, so that you can just have one bag of flour that makes your bread, your cakes, your biscuits and everything else. So back to the gluten-free flour thing, my top tip is, once you understand that when a recipe says gluten-free flour, it doesn't mean a specific thing. There are lots and lots of different gluten-free flour blends out on the market, and each of them will have different quantities of these different flours in them. And since every gluten-free flour, individual flour, has different properties, the blend that you buy will also have different properties. So the blend that you buy will, if you baked a cake with all of the different flour blends that were available on the market, that cake would be different with each of the blends. It may work with some, it may not work with others, if you just took a standard recipe. So my top tip for successful baking is to understand that if a recipe says gluten-free flour, there's a high possibility that that is not going to work if you just go to the supermarket and pick one of the gluten-free flour blends that's available to you. If the recipe says Dove's Farm gluten-free flour, brilliant, buy Dove's Farm gluten-free flour and make the recipe, and it's likely to work, assuming that whoever's developed the recipe was good at developing recipes. But if you find a recipe that just says gluten-free flour, then be aware that there's a high chance that it may not work. And if you've had lots of baking failures, this is probably why. It's because you're purchasing a blend of different flours in the supermarket, and it's not necessarily the one that the recipe developer had used in their recipe. So top tip number one is to basically use the flour blend that is specified in a recipe. If there is no if they don't say which flour blend they've used, you could contact the person who's made it. So there's so many bloggers out there that are doing amazing recipes. Just send them an email or contact them on social media and ask them what flour blend they're using, because then you'll get successful results. And most bloggers will say in the recipe, and if they don't, they'll be very happy to tell you. And here in the UK, I guess most people will use the Dove's Farm blend because it's the most widely available. Having said that, most of the supermarkets have now brought out their own blends, and they are different from the Dove's Farm one, so you'll get different results. Pretty much all of the recipes on my website now are using my own flour blend. So if you want to bake these cinnamon rolls, for example, I wouldn't try to make them with Dove's Farm flour, because it's a completely different blend of flour from mine. And your results are not likely to be like these. So, as I say, just be careful to choose the flour blend that matches the recipe you're using. So back to my flour blend and why it's different. Almost all, if not all, of the flour blends that are on the market are made up of white starches. So this is what I was briefly explaining earlier. But nutritionally, they have very little quality in them. So they will be effectively taken on by your body as sugar, converted very quickly into sugar, and will be got rid of very quickly. And that's why you often find that when my daughter was first diagnosed with celiac disease when she was 2, she was constantly hungry. She was just always hungry, because the food just, went through her body very, very quickly through her system. So the flours that I chose, the teff, sorghum and buckwheat, which make up the bulk of my blend, I chose them because of the fact that they are high in fibre and protein, and because they're whole grains, they keep you fuller for longer, and all those great benefits that you get from whole grain flours and whole grains in general. I don't know what else I was going to tell you. You may want to know where you can buy it. That would be helpful. So the flour blend is on my website. I don't sell it through any other place. And that's because I really like to understand and support all of my customers. So I have a private Facebook group that people can join, which is all about cooking and baking gluten-free. And specifically, you know, if you've bought my flour and you want help with it, then it's a lovely, friendly group. So I chose, around about a year after I launched the flour in 2016, to solely sell it myself, just so that I could support everybody in terms of baking successfully. So I've effectively done all the hard work for you. I've created a whole load of recipes that work, that are nutritionally great. And then the last thing to add, I guess, is that I don't add any rice into my flour blend. So if you don't like that grainy kind of texture you get when you bake with most gluten-free flour blends, then you won't get that with this, because that's the rice flour. And the reason that rice flour is used very extensively through all of the gluten-free market, so whether it's pre-made breads, pastas, or anything else, is because it's cheap, or relatively cheap. So yeah, I don't have it in here. And the main reason for that is because of rice having arsenic in it. And this was something that I kind of buried my head in the sand about when my daughter was first diagnosed, because I knew that she was eating a lot of rice, because it was basically in all of the products that I was giving her, the breads, the pastas, the flour that I was baking with, and everything else. And because she'd been dairy-free initially before she was diagnosed with celiac disease, I'd been advised by the dietitian not to give her rice milk, and I hadn't really wanted to investigate why. But when I did investigate, I found that it was because of the amount of arsenic in it. And so for the ordinary general public who eat rice with their curry a couple of times a week, it's never going to be an issue. However, if you're gluten-free, it is something that you might want to look into, the amount of rice that you're eating in all of your products, because it does build up, the arsenic does build up in your body, and it isn't got rid of. So for me, bringing up a small child who was diagnosed with celiac disease at a young age, this was something that I felt was something that I wanted to get on top of, which is why I created a flour blend that didn't have rice in it, so that we could eat rice, but we wouldn't be overdoing the amount of rice that we were having in all of our baked goods. So I think that's all I need to tell you really about gluten-free flours and gluten-free baking. If anyone's got any questions, I would love to have them. We've got another set.
Well, we do have one more, not quite a question, but just an observation from Hannah, who says that she can't eat rice or corn, so she has to learn to make her own mixes as well.
Yes, and that's it exactly. So you know, the other way of doing it is to go and do a whole load of research, which is what I did. And this doesn't have corn in either, by the way. But yeah, the corn and rice are very widely used in gluten-free products. So if you can't eat either, that's a real challenge for you, and I can see why you would have had to have done all the research. So yeah, the other option is to go and kind of do some research yourself about all the different flours and put together a blend that works for you. But as I say, that's kind of what I've done. I've done the hard work for you effectively. And actually, earlier this year, I also launched a bread mix. So if you want a whole grain, a wholemeal type, really lovely soft bread, then that's what my bread mix is for. It's taken me years and years to get to a bread that actually tastes and has the texture of bread and doesn't fall apart. And so I launched that as a mix earlier this year. So that's available on my website as well.
Well, fantastic, Vicki Montague. What an amazingly simple, clear, concise, and passionate way to present cinnamon rolls for everybody to be able to enjoy. And if you just want to give everyone a quick reminder how they can get in touch with you, how they can find out more about the recipes, what the website is, and then we'll say thank you.
Sure. So the website is freefromfairy.com. And all my recipes are on there, cookery courses, ebooks, recipe books, all the recipes. And then I'm free from fairy across social media as well.
Well, you've had a little bit of recommendation also from Stephen for your Facebook page. Stephen says, not only do you get great support from Vicki, but her followers are brilliant at sharing their own tips and advice. Sounds like a great community. Thank you very much, Vicki Montague. That was brilliant. Now, we're going to have some more live Christmas music, or rather Christmas music that was live when it was recorded, especially for us. And then we are going to take a short break until 2 o'clock, when we will be returning with a session called Seasonal Passion Fruit Cupcakes with Coconut Cream Icing from the FODMAP Cookbook Friendly Kitchen, presented by Emma Hatcher. So that is something to look forward to. But in the meantime, we're going to leave you with some fantastic music from a band or a group all the way from Nashville in Tennessee in America. And they're going to be performing for us right now. This is Lost Hollow.